Okay, first things first, I'm going to acknowledge that the clickbaity title might be a little bit insensitive, but once I get into it, you'll hopefully get my point. If you're exclusively here for the discussion of who would actually win in a brawl between Oppenheimer and Godzilla, it's obviously Godzilla. No question about it. But now, I'm going to get into what this video is actually about. This is pretty common historical knowledge, but just to make things clear, I'm going to touch on it anyway. Robert J. Oppenheimer is the so-called father of the atomic bomb. He led a group of scientists to create it for the US government. The US government then used that bomb in Japan in August of 1945 at the tail end of the Second World War. Twice in fact, once in Hiroshima and then a few days later in Nagasaki.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
And now, with the release of the Oppenheimer movie, I've seen a few takes criticising the film's lack of Japanese perspective. That's understandable. The atomic bomb left such a devastating, long-lasting impact on Japan that wasn't really touched upon in the film. But I would respond by pointing out that the film is more specifically about Oppenheimer himself and not the bomb. During his life and the lead up to the bomb, humanity had arguably never had death and destruction of that scale before. It is easy for us to damn him for it, knowing what it resulted in, but he had nothing to compare it to. This tweet put it better than I could. The depiction of Oppenheimer's moral calculus is disturbing to us because of the horrific lived consequences of dropping the bombs. The perspective of Japanese civilians was an inaccessible abstraction to Oppenheimer. Being disturbed by their absence is the whole point. And so, to clarify, I'm talking about Christopher Nolan's choices as a filmmaker here. I'm not really commenting on Oppenheimer's choices as a scientist working on a weapon of mass destruction. And so, before my original point gets away from me, Oppenheimer is a story told from his perspective, and that of the government and the scientists involved. But there is a whole Japanese film industry that portrays their side of the story. There are loads of brilliant movies that portray their stories of the horrors that they dealt with, both directly and through metaphors. The bombings influenced the creation of manga and anime. Like, have you seen Grave of the Fireflies? It's a beautiful, crushing movie. Or Akira, which is one of the greatest animated movies of all time. And it doesn't get much bigger than this one, the Godzilla franchise. In the original film, Godzilla stirs after an American H-bomb test in the South Pacific. The creature becomes radiated, hurt, and angry. And I think you know the rest. William Tsutsu, author of Godzilla on My Mind, 50 Years of the King of Monsters, has even described Godzilla as innocent as the kids on their playgrounds in Hiroshima. What a devastating quote. Godzilla's heavily furrowed skin, or scales, were even designed to resemble the keloid scars of the survivors of the atomic bombs that the US dropped on Japan just 9 years before the film's release. I'm not going to use any of that real-life imagery here, because honestly, it's far too harrowing, and the powers that be might not like that kind of thing being on YouTube and Facebook. But there you go, something to consider when you're discussing Oppenheimer, or the next time you're watching a Godzilla movie. It's about much more than a giant dinosaur stomping through cities. The lore goes pretty deep, and I highly recommend checking out some of those movies, or at least going and checking out some video essays on YouTube, because people make them a lot better than I do. The modern American Godzilla movies have kind of had the political origins sanitized from them.
In 1954.
No tests.
They were trying to kill it.
Which is not to say that they're all bad. I really enjoyed Godzilla vs. Kong, but Japan is still making Godzilla movies, and many of them still have a lot to say. For example, the recent Shin Godzilla is a satire about how useless governments can be when they get caught up in bureaucracy, rather than committing to any real action. It's a great movie, and I highly recommend it. I'm also looking forward to the recently announced sequel, Godzilla -1. I would also like to point out that I know that not all Godzilla films are very political. A lot of them are pretty goofy, just guys in suits just having a good time.
Godzilla.
Beating each other up. And that's pretty cool too.
Okay, that's
Godzilla!
Oh, and I know you're here for superhero content, so I may as well add in that there is going to be a Justice League vs. Godzilla vs. Kong comic that starts in October. It should be pretty neat. My little brother loves all things kaiju, so I'm probably going to end up reading this one with him.